Hello, my name is Elijah Wells, and today's review is Ridley Scott's new movie, Gladiator 2. Taking place 16 years after the events of the first film, Paul Mescal, who plays Lucius in the movie, becomes a gladiator after his home gets invaded by the Roman Empire and the Roman army, which is being led by Marcus Aurelius, who's being portrayed by Pedro Pascal. So, essentially, like the first film, he works throughout most of the rankings of the gladiator realm, and of course, tries to seek his revenge against Marcus, and as well as being under the ownership of Marcus, being portrayed by Denzel Washington, who's also plotting to overthrow the Roman government and the Roman Empire, being Greta and Keller. Ridley Scott is essentially one of the most prolific directors of all time at the moment, releasing movies every 3 or 2 years at most. Even though ever since his Gladiator film came out in 2000, winning his only Best Picture winning Oscar, even though he wasn't a producer in the movie, so he didn't theoretically win. But however, ever since then, he was pretty much on a really upward trend at the moment in Hollywood. That still continues to go up. He released films like Kingdom of Heaven, American Gangster, The Martian, Prometheus, Alien Covenant, and as well as House of Gucci, and more recently Napoleon, to pretty much boast to his really prolific 21st century as a director. But when it comes to Gladiator, and chances of it ever getting a sequel was pretty much going to be like a Roman myth longer it went on, as it had been in development hell for 20 plus years. So much so, there was even numerous storylines about Maximus, being Russell Crowe's character, meeting up with Jesus, or the Roman afterlife, how it goes about that, or Maximus somehow going about time traveling. And guess what? That story was written by none other than Nick Cave. As in, yes, Nick Cave of The Bad Seeds, whose most famous album is Murder Ballads. Yes, that Nick Cave. So obviously the story got scrapped, and Scott just moved on to other things as well. But however, the sequel essentially got its calling back, not just with him back on board, but also with Pedro Pascal, and also Paul Mescal, who recently got an Oscar nomination for his widely praised performance in After Sun, and as well as his majorly well praised performance in Normal People from BBC, and as well the Denzel Washington, who did collaborate with Ridley Scott with American Gangster, but as well as Connie Nielsen, who also returns in the movie as well. Even when the film was being filmed, it was even less than smooth sailing at this point, because apparently there was even an incident when they were filming out in Morocco that one of the sets apparently accidentally caught on fire, and 6 or 7 people ended up being sent to a hospital after it went down. Then when they finally moved to Malta, the actors' strike just kicked off, and of course they couldn't do any more filming, and I kid you not, I was on holiday in Malta, and I actually rode past the sets on my way to the Gonzo Islands on a ferry, and the Coliseum was still there, and one of the prop-up buildings was also there, just one of them, even though the rest was most likely done by CGI. But it was very interesting, because this is probably the closest I ever got to an actual film set. Even though I didn't see any of the actors in there, of course, due to the actors' strike, because I was on holiday in Malta when the strikes were going down. But I'm guessing the only security were there, just so nothing gets stolen or vandalized, which is something I found incredible, just looking at a brief window of filming history. But also that Ridley Scott, around that point, after the strikes finally commenced for a fair deal with writers and actors, he went on to promote Napoleon, and the film actually finished filming earlier this year in January. To zoom in on Paul Mescal, even though it's going to take quite a deal to fill in for Russell Crowe's already big shoes in the original, as in he did win the Best Actor Oscar when the film initially came out, but for Paul Mescal, who at this point was his only major role was in After Sun, which he did get an Oscar nomination for, I feel like he doesn't strike me as such of an authoritative and more of a masculinized version that Maximus was in the original. Even though, yes, he does do a really great performance in the movie, but I feel like it at a couple of instances, he does feel like a somewhat of an imitation of Maximus, in my opinion. But I feel like there's some instances where he tries to do his own thing, but he's definitely still cast like way below the shadow that is the larger than life personality that is Maximus, or Brussels Crowe's character from the original movie. Even though he does deliver a great performance in the film. The movie does also go into the more of a political intrigue of the Roman Empire as well, as in, the movie does feature a really big subplot about Pedro Pascal's character and so is Denzel Washington's character, both plotting a coup against the Roman Empire to essentially recreate the Roman Empire to essentially their own image, which, even though I really like to see it, see the intrigue a lot more deeply in this movie, even though how that intertwines with Paul Mescal's character as well, since I really love to see that as well, because in first of all, Maximus is essentially at the beginning of the film, he was pretty much the peak of his military career with the Roman Empire, and for him, for Paul Mescal, he essentially as a somewhat of a scavenger in the beginning of the film that's leading a ragtag army against the Roman Empire. The one thing you can certainly take for a win for Ridley Scott movies, particularly in his last movie in Napoleon, is that there is definitely loads of effort being put into the costuming work as well as the set decoration of this movie. Like, the movie in its design form is actually really gorgeous to look at. Like, the costuming work, particularly of the senators, are really gorgeous to look at and definitely really beautiful to see, and particularly in their parties and how the entire set and the entire costuming work plays back in the rules of mise-en-scène and the visual language using like set decorations or costuming work, which is something that is definitely very key to see in a lot of these movies, and how he utilizes it in a more of an efficient manner like he does in this movie, which is also really, really good in my opinion. And also, again, love the designs of the Roman Empire, which, even though the movie does use some stand-ins, like apparently in the UK as well, but notably also in Malta, because I did row past the sets on a ferry, and also apparently a little bit in Morocco, which again, how they use all these three different environments to their advantage to essentially create an empire that pretty much went extinct like well over 1,000 years ago, and how they essentially brought it back up to life, particularly with practical sets, which again, I rode past them when I was on my holiday trip to Malta. Like, at this point, it's going to be a drinking game every time I say Malta in this video. Even though, yes, this is definitely a pretty CGI heavy movie like the first film was, even though this it does use CGI to more of a does use CGI when it's most needed at best, and this movie does follow the same rules as the first film does, as in use them where it's most needed as, so it doesn't look like it's overdoing CGI at best, even though there are definitely a lot of sequences like the monkeys, like eating the gladiators' faces off. There were, of course, rhinos versus like gladiator fights, which were apparently also done with some CG and took apparently a couple of days just to film it correctly. And it's also a massive scene where they flood the arena to essentially recreate the Battle of Persia with real sharks, even though I feel like the CGI kind of falters a little bit because the sharks looked a little bit unrealistic from my opinion, but this is kind of me just being a little bit of a nitpicky person when it comes to CGI and how it contrasts over to the animal department. But again, the CGI effects in this movie are definitely really gorgeous as well. Particularly in more of the dreamy sequences, like Paul Mescal's character does experience, particularly in the near the beginning of the film, and as well as near the end of the movie, where it almost feels very dreamy-like, and also uses a lot of color coding of like blue velvety colors and a little bit of purple here and there, which again feels very dreamy and very ethereal in my opinion. Even though the movie is a sequel to another movie that's basically 20 years old, I feel like they did do some callbacks which I kind of question if it was warranted for, whether or not yes or no it was, but like there was music, even though it wasn't done by Hans Zimmer this time, but done by the pretty underrated composer, being Harry Gregson Williams, who did compose for a couple other Ridley Scott movies. He does do the Now We Are Free song, which Hans Zimmer did with Lisa Gerrard, who also did collaborate again with the Dune movies as well for the choral stuff. They did do the Now We Are Free, like yeah, this is kind of my best take on it, and does play the actual song again near the around the ending of the film, as the same fashion as it did in the first film as well. And of course, I feel like the movie does throw again a bit of the throwbackish territory again, with some quotes like "What we do in life echoes in eternity," and also most of the time between halfway and the third act of the movie, it does call back a lot more to Maximus's character, and of course what his status was in the first film, and what was his aftermath essentially in the movie, which I don't want to spoil right away, but it is interesting. But I feel like they, in terms of a throwback, they kind of over seasoned it a little bit. Although there are some very notable flaws in the movie, as in even though Paul Mescal isn't as the super buff figure of authority that like Russell Crowe was, and a massive towering figure like he was in the movie, I feel like he does give a really great performance in the movie. I saw as much as the cast in the movie, and even though the movie does dilly-dally into some throwback territory now, I feel like this is definitely a very satisfying sequel in the movie. Like, this is a somewhat improved from Ridley Scott's previous film, being Napoleon, and essentially goes back to his most critically acclaimed movie of the 21st century, and making a sequel about it, and saying to himself, how do I make a sequel out of this and not make it suck? Like, there is going to be a massively high chance of making a sequel like years and years away and somehow sucking, like the Joker movie, which was utter crap, but guess what? People pretty much baited for that sequel, so much so it took like 5 years to make. Even though, yes, Ridley Scott did return to the Alien franchise after like something like a 30 or 40 year wait. So he came back with Prometheus and then later with Alien Covenant, even though both did receive polarizing reviews, but however, I still passionately defend these films, even though some were a bit turned off for its overload on philosophy and its gore. Even though this is definitely a really, really worthy sequel to already a massive movie, even though it's not as brilliant as the first film is, but it's definitely a brilliant film that stands up on its own. But as a sequel, even though it could improve in some areas with some gashing flaws, but I feel like if this is the best it can do, then this is the best it can do. So for Gladiator 2, I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 on this one. So, what do you think of Gladiator 2? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to my channel and also comment below, and also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and on Letterboxd. This is Elijah Wells, and bye.